Steve turned around, took one last look at the orphanage, and then walked away down the alley that led to the city. Steve was brought up in an orphanage from the age of 3. He hardly remembered his mother, and he didn't know his father at all. But now he had to return to his home, where he had not been for more than 15 years. Housing was provided for other graduates. There were small apartments in different parts of the city, but Steve had a house, according to the documents, which he inherited from his mother and grandmother. Now he had to go back there and live in the countryside. The guy was in a bad mood. The village must have been deserted by now, and he had no idea what to do there. The road took a long time. Steve was hungry and very tired, so he got to the place and looked into the local store to buy himself some food. He was surprised because a pretty girl was standing behind the counter. Steve smiled at her. "Hi, what's your name?" The black-eyed beauty chuckled. "Did you come to the store for this?" "Of course not. Although I'm a young single guy. Maybe I'm your destiny." The girl laughed. "If you're my destiny, then some unsightly." At that moment, the door of the store opened and grandmother appeared on the threshold.
"Dolores, who are you talking to?"
"With a buyer." Grandma looked at Steve.
"I don't remember such a guy in our village. Who are you?"
"My name is Steve. I was born in this village. My grandmother and mother lived here. Maybe you know the Maxwells?"
"Yes, how beautiful you grew up. And I'm Mrs. Page, your neighbor, and this is my granddaughter Dolores. You always played together when you were children, and you were called bride and groom."
She laughed and turned to Dolores.
"I told you about it."
The embarrassed girl exclaimed, "Granny, that's enough."
"Don't swear. It's better to give me flour and butter. I'll bake a pie. I need to treat Steve with something."
Steve was embarrassed now, as he wasn't used to being kindly treated by strangers. "Mrs. Page, why? I'll buy myself some food so I won't go hungry. I'm embarrassed in front of you." Grandmother exclaimed,
"No, boy. Everything here is simple. If you want to live here, then get used to it."
The young man smiled, then bought what he needed. He waited for Mrs. Page to also buy groceries, then took her bags from her and offered to walk her home. The old lady said,
"Let's go, Steve. Let's go."
She then nodded to her granddaughter.
"You don't need to linger here either."
On the way to the house, Steve and Mrs. Page got into a conversation. He told her how he was brought up in an orphanage. Mrs. Page shook her head for a long time and then began to answer Steve's questions.
"Your mother Maria was unhappy. Elizabeth suppressed her since childhood, and I told her to leave the girl alone. Maybe now she would live. She didn't let your father Robert and Maria live together, so he left her. When they became to live together, they were very young. They were 18 years old. They lived together for a little while, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and then Robert went into the army. He didn't come back from there. Elizabeth told him to find himself another woman. Here's such a life."
Steve wanted to ask something else, but at this time they approached the grandmother's house. The guy said goodbye to his neighbor and went to his room. The unkempt and neglected house brought melancholy and despondency to him. Steve wandered around the rooms, took a broom standing in the corner and removed the cobwebs in the doorway. Then he wiped the chair with a rag and sat down. He said sadly, "Here I'm at home, but everything here is very bleak." The guy sat a little longer and went to look at the sheds. Desolation was everywhere. The grass in some places hit the guy with his head, and he hurried back in the house. Steve tried to remember his childhood but couldn't. Suddenly, he really wanted to cry uncontrollably as in childhood, because he felt his loneliness more than ever. But he was not used to crying, and he endured all hardships and insults with tightly compressed lips. And now he clenched his will into a fist and began cleaning, deciding to clean up at least one room. Suddenly, a rustle was heard. Steve looked into the corridor and saw a large puppy, which wrapped itself in a pile of some rags and tried to lie down to sleep comfortably. The guy smiled as he picked up the puppy. "Who are you?" The puppy was very emaciated from hunger, despite the fact that he was a large breed. Steve fed the puppy and continued cleaning. He spent several hours cleaning, but the house didn't become cozier. Suddenly, Someone's footsteps were heard on the porch. The guy looked out and saw Dolores. The girl said, "My grandmother is calling you for dinner." Then she blushed and gasped when she saw the puppy. "Where did you get him from? How pretty he is." "He was here, hiding in the hallway. I don't know how he got there. Now he will live with me." The girl smiled and looked him straight in the eyes. Then they went to the next house. Steve enjoyed visiting Mrs. Page and Dolores. They treated him as the closest and dearest person, and he didn't know how to thank them. He only said that they could count on him day and night. And they began to live in a friendly neighborhood. The next morning, Dolores came to Steve's house and helped him clean it up. He didn't even expect that everything would be done so deftly and well. The girl even brought curtains and hung them on the windows. She explained that they had been in their closet for more than a year. After cleaning, Dolores asked Steve to help her stack the wood in the shed. Steve readily agreed, but by the evening, he didn't feel his arms or legs from fatigue. He didn't immediately get used to rural life, but suddenly he realized that he really liked such a life. And he really wanted Dolores to always be there. She also had no parents. First, her father died, and then 5 years ago, her mother died. She had only Mrs. Page, the closest of all relatives, her mom's mom. But the girl didn't lose heart, although she was very sorry that her mother and father had gone to another world so early. She talked a lot about them to Steve, and sometimes it seemed to him that he knew them very well. A couple of months later, Dolores helped the guy get a job. Now, he was a loader in a food warehouse. Of course, for this he had to travel to a neighboring village, but that meant nothing. But Steve was very proud when he received his first salary. He bought Mrs. Page and Dolores the city's gifts and gave them a real party in the evening. He said, "I'll save money and I'll run a farm. I will supply my products to the market." Dolores laughed, knowing how hard it is for Steve to live in the countryside. "Farmer, are your axe blisters healed?" He laughed in response. "From an axe, yes. From a shovel, not yet." And Mrs. Page thought, looking at him, that such a groom would be perfect for her granddaughter. Handsome, not afraid of work, and doesn't drink alcohol like other guys in their village. A year passed. One summer, Steve and Dolores went swimming in the river, accompanied by their faithful dog. They were having fun, and Steve caught Dolores and held her tightly to him. But suddenly, she froze and looked into the guy's eyes. He understood everything and kissed her, obeying some kind of call. The girl gasped, but didn't push the guy away, but answered the kiss. From that day on, Steve and Dolores started talking about the wedding and announced to Mrs. Page that they were going to get married. The grandmother wept with joy at such news and hugged her grandchildren. Steve was tidying up the attic one morning when he found a box full of photos, greeting cards, and odds and ends. There were also several letters written by a certain Robert to Maria. Steve thought about it and suddenly gasped. They were letters from his father to his mother. Robert wrote about his imminent return, about his love for her, and that she would definitely take Maria with him. In subsequent letters, he asked why she was not answering, and finally, he reproached her for not loving him. Robert wrote, "I received a letter from your mother. I know that you are getting married. Have you completely forgotten me?" Steve considered. His mom didn't read any of those letters. She didn't even open them. But why? The guy collected the whole bundle of letters and went to Mrs. Page. Maybe she knows the answer, but she just shook her head and said, "It turns out that your grandmother Elizabeth set everything up, so she separated them. She didn't like her son-in-law. She received letters and hid them. Maybe Robert doesn't know you exist. After all, your mother gave birth to you, and soon she died. Elizabeth followed her away from grief. She realized what she had done. That's why you ended up in an orphanage." Steve turned the envelope over in his hands. "Mrs. Page, there is a return address here. I can find my father. I will definitely find him." And the very next day, he said goodbye to the bride and her grandmother and left to look for his father. He did it quickly, and now he was already standing in front of a tall and handsome man whose copy was himself. "Are you Roberts?" "Yes. Who are you?" "And I'm Steve, your son. Maria gave birth to me. Look, these are your letters to her." Robert took the letters in his hands and then staggered. "Come inside, guy. Tell me everything." The long conversation ended with a strong hug between father and son. Robert said, "I have a different family for a long time, but I won't leave you either. I live well, as you can see, and I will help you get on your feet. I used to be poor, so Elizabeth didn't like me. You will study, get a specialty, and come to work for me at the firm. You will have everything, absolutely everything. We will travel abroad. You will see the world. Do you want this, my son?" Steve replied, "I really want this." "That's good. We'll decide everything. Now, my wife and both daughters are resting in France. Soon we will join them. My wife is a smart woman, so she will understand everything. I think that your sisters will also be glad to meet you. We need to get you an international passport." Steve replied, smiling at his father, "No, Dad, thanks. That's not what I came for. I just wanted you to know about me. You have a right to it. Dolores and Mrs. Page and my dog are waiting for me at home." Robert said, "I won't let you go so quickly. We need to learn more about each other and talk about so much. How stupid I was that I believed your grandmother then. How could I not go to Maria and not talk to her? I won't forgive myself for this." Since then, 2 weeks have passed. Dolores even lost weight from the experience. Steve called her and said that he was staying with his father for a while, that his father was very happy with him and wanted to be with him for a while. The girl looked up at the elderly woman with huge eyes. "Grandma, what if Steve doesn't come back? What will happen then?" But Mrs. Page was silent. She knew well how tempting money was. But one evening, a car stopped at Steve's house. 2 men got out. It was Steve and Robert. Steve said, "So I'm back." And then he hugged the girl who ran out to meet him. And Mrs. Page invited guests for tea. Several years have passed. Steve and Dolores were married and had a daughter. Father helped Steve open his farm, and the young couple was happy and full of hope for a future that was filled only with joy and love for them.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. "I will do my best." Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. "Did you not hear what I said?" "I'm sorry." I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. "I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime," he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. "All right, everyone's presentations are done." "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me. "There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer." He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.